Imagine a quiet evening in an ancient city. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of oil lamps flicker, shadows dance on the stone walls, and a light aroma of incense wafts through the air. A small group of people have gathered in one of the houses. They sit in a circle, their faces illuminated by the soft light. And each of them believes that right here, right now, they are touching something sacred, a truth that will change not only their lives, but the whole world. This is how the movements we call cults today were born, and some of them have indeed changed the course of human history. Greetings, my dear listeners, and I invite you to write in the comments what city you are from and what time it is. I am always curious where on our planet you are listening to these lines, and whether the silence of the night, or perhaps the first rays of dawn, are accompanying you now. The word cult is spoken today with special caution, as if it were a spell that might summon something dangerous. But once upon a time, the word simply meant worship, veneration, service to a deity. In ancient Rome, cults were people who made sacrifices to the gods, performed sacred rituals, and kept the traditions of their ancestors. Time, like a river, has carried away the original meaning of this word, and today it has acquired new meanings, sometimes frightening. What is it that turns a group of believers into what we call a destructive cult? Imagine the thin line between devotion and blind obedience, between spiritual quest and loss of self-will. Sociologists and psychologists have identified the characteristics of such communities. And when you get to know them, you realize how easily a person can stumble on this invisible boundary. First of all, at the center of any cult is the figure of a leader, a charismatic personality who is like a magnet, attracting souls who are hungry for answers to eternal questions. This person has a special gift, the ability to say exactly what people want to hear, to offer simple solutions to complex problems, to promise what is so lacking in ordinary life: meaning, belonging, chosenness. A cult leader is often driven not only by spiritual motives, money, power, even simple human vanity can become the driving forces behind beautiful words about salvation and enlightenment. A strict hierarchy is formed around such a leader. It resembles a pyramid, with an unquestionable authority at the top. And each lower level knows only what it is supposed to know. New adepts are not allowed access to the internal secrets of the organization. They must first prove their loyalty, go through trials that gradually tear them away from their former life. The methods cults use to attract and retain followers are amazing in their sophistication. It is not crude coercion. It is a subtle art of influencing the human psyche. The process begins with the so-called love bombardment. The newcomer is surrounded with care and attention, which he may have lacked in ordinary life. Imagine a lonely person who has been searching for his place in the world for a long time, and suddenly he finds himself in a community where he is welcomed as a long-awaited friend, where his every word is listened to with interest, where he feels understood and accepted. Then a deeper work with the consciousness begins. The person is gradually isolated from the previous environment, family, friends, colleagues. This is done not abruptly, but carefully, under the pretext that the outside world does not understand the true path, or that close people may hinder spiritual development. Gradually, a feeling is formed that only here, in this group, a person can find real support and understanding. People who are going through difficult periods in their lives are particularly vulnerable to the influence of cults. They may be newcomers in a new city, people who have lost their jobs or are experiencing personal tragedy, lonely people searching for the meaning of life. At such times, the human soul is especially open to new influences, and skillful manipulators skillfully exploit this vulnerability. Recruitment often takes place through people we know, friends, relatives, colleagues who have already become part of the cult. This makes the process even more effective because we tend to trust people we know and respect. Imagine your good friend telling you about a wonderful community that has helped him find answers to important questions. He looks happy and peaceful, and you want to understand what has given him such confidence in life. The process of processing a new member is based on a deep understanding of human psychology. The natural tendency of people to imitate others and obey authorities is utilized. A special atmosphere is created in the group, where deviation from the common rules is perceived as a betrayal, not only of the leader, but also of all brothers and sisters. A powerful sense of collective responsibility is formed when a person is afraid of disappointing the people who have become a new family for him. Critical thinking is suppressed not by prohibitions, but by more subtle methods. Doubts are declared to be a manifestation of weakness of spirit, or the influence of dark forces. Questions are not forbidden, but answers are given, which instead of clarification, only deepen dependence on doctrine. You are not yet ready to understand this truth. Your mind has not yet been purified from worldly delusions. Such phrases become the universal answer to any doubts. Gradually, a person forms a special state of consciousness, which psychologists call cognitive dissonance. This is a painful state when inner beliefs contradict external reality. To get rid of this discomfort, a person often chooses not to revise his views, but to immerse himself even more in the world of the cult, where everything is explained simply and understandably. Many cults began as sincere spiritual movements seeking to renew religious life or to find new paths to truth. History has seen many examples of small groups of enthusiasts growing over time into powerful organizations, influencing the destinies of millions of people. Some of the traditional religions that today are considered respectable and universally recognized were once regarded by society as dangerous sects. Christianity, in the first centuries of its existence, was perceived by the Roman authorities as a subversive cult. Christian meetings were held in secret, in catacombs and private houses. They refused to worship the Roman gods and the emperor, and preached the equality of all people before God. Ideas that seemed dangerous and destructive to Roman society. It took centuries for Christianity to become the official religion of the empire, and then the basis of European civilization. Buddhism, which originated in India as a reform movement within Hinduism, underwent a similar evolution. Siddhartha Gautama, whom we know as the Buddha, created a doctrine that in many ways contradicted the traditional views of his time. He rejected the caste system, questioned the authority of the Brahmins, and proposed a path of liberation available to everyone, regardless of their background. For many contemporaries, this looked like a dangerous heresy, undermining the foundations of social order. Islam, too, began as a movement that met fierce resistance from traditional Arab society. Muhammad preached monotheism in a society where many deities were worshipped, called for social justice in a world of inequality, and united disparate tribes around a new idea. The first Muslims were persecuted, and many were forced to leave their native Mecca and seek refuge in other lands. What distinguishes a spiritual movement that becomes a great religion from a cult that brings suffering to its followers? This question does not have a simple answer. Perhaps the key role is played by the openness of the teaching, its ability to evolve and adapt to the changing world. Great religions did not close themselves off, but opened themselves to dialogue with the surrounding culture, absorbed the best achievements of human thought, and found a common language with science and philosophy. Destructive cults, as a rule, strive for complete isolation from the outside world. They create an alternative reality where special laws apply, where ordinary human values are turned upside down. In such a reality, what in the ordinary world is recognized as evil may be considered a virtue, and vice versa. The history of mankind knows many examples of religious ideas being used to justify crime. Documents studied by experts describe cases in which cults have become a cover for the most common criminal activities, drug trafficking, extortion, even murder. Religious rhetoric, in such cases, serves only as a beautiful wrapper for quite mundane and self-serving purposes. The trend of cults beginning to use ideas of the coming end of the world is particularly disturbing. Apocalyptic sentiments can become a powerful tool for controlling people's minds. When a person believes that the world is on the threshold of catastrophe and salvation is possible only through belonging to a chosen group, he is ready for the most extreme actions. History knows tragic examples of mass suicides committed by members of apocalyptic cults who believed in the inevitability of the end and decided to leave before the universal destruction. Studying these dark pages of human history, one can't help but wonder, what makes people abandon their own reason, their ties with loved ones, everything that constitutes a normal human life? Perhaps the answer lies in the very nature of human beings, in their inescapable longing for meaning, in their desire to belong to something greater than themselves, in the hope of finding simple answers to the complex questions of existence. Sometimes religious beliefs take forms that may seem strange or even frightening to us. In the hot streets of Mexican cities, where the sun burns mercilessly during the day, and at night the air is filled with the aromas of coriander and roasted meat, a very unusual deity is worshipped among the common people. Imagine a figure dressed in a white wedding dress, but instead of a face, there is a skull, and in its bony hands, a scythe of death. This is Santa Muerte, Saint Death, the patron saint of those whom ordinary society rejects and forgets. The history of this cult goes back to ancient times, to the times of the mighty Aztec empires, when Mictlantecutli, the lord of the underworld, was worshipped in lavish temples. Pyramids. The Spanish conquistadors brought Christianity with them, but the ancient beliefs did not disappear. They dissolved into the new religion like honey in warm milk, creating an amazing fusion of pagan and Christian ideas about death and the underworld. In the 90s of the 20th century, when Mexico was hit by a wave of poverty and social upheaval, the cult of Santa Muerte came out of hiding. Ordinary people, to whom the traditional church seemed too far removed from their daily concerns, found solace in this folk faith. Saint Death did not judge them for their sins, nor did she demand strict moral standards. She was simply there, understanding and forgiving. Santa Muerte has many names: Skinny Lady, Bony Lady, White Girl, White Sister, Godmother. Each of these names reflects some facet of her essence, some aspect of her patronage. On altars decorated with brightly colored flowers and flickering candles, she is offered gifts of tequila and water, simple offerings from ordinary people. This cult has become especially popular among those who live on the margins of society: prisoners, drug addicts, prostitutes, members of criminal cartels. For them, Santa Muerte is not just a religious symbol, but a well protector who understands their lives better than anyone else. In prison cells, where the law reigns and where every day can be the last, prayers to the Holy Death are especially sincere. But cults and religious movements in the underworld are not limited to the present day. At the beginning of the 20th century, in the same Mexico, lived a man whom many compared to the legendary Robin Hood. Jesus Malverde was a common bandit who robbed rich farmers and helped the poor. In the year 1999, he was caught and executed, but his death only increased his fame. Gradually, legends began to form around the name of Malverde. It was said that even after his death, he continued to perform miracles, helping to find a lost cow, guiding a mule laden with gold to a needy family. The common people of northwestern Mexico began to honor him as a saint, as an angel of the poor, and a generous bandit. Interestingly, Malverde's cult is particularly popular among the middle ranks of the drug cartels. These people, balancing between wealth and death, between power and constant fear, see in him a protector who understands their dangerous lives. Drug dealers, pickpockets, prostitutes, beggars, they all find comfort in the belief that there is someone in heaven who does not judge them for their chosen path. Sometimes, religious ideas penetrate even the most unexpected spheres of human activity. In faraway Taiwan, there is an ancient custom associated with the god of wealth, Master Han Dan. This god, according to local beliefs, hates cold, and therefore, during the Festival of Lanterns, people throw firecrackers at the person representing the deity. Imagine this scene. Hundreds of small explosions flash in the night darkness. The air is filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder, and in the center of this fiery chaos stands a man in a mask and shorts, taking on a warming rain of firecrackers. It is believed that Master Handan was once the god of bandits and hooligans. And since the 70s of the 20th century, criminal syndicates in Taiwan have used this ancient ritual for their own purposes. Whoever survived the firecracker bombardment the longest became the new leader of the gang. It was a kind of fiery test of power, where physical endurance and readiness for pain became the measure of leadership qualities. The authorities banned this ritual in 1984, but later, in 1989, it was revived as a tourist attraction. This is how an ancient religious tradition turned first into a criminal custom, and then into an exotic entertainment for travelers. Sometimes, criminal organizations do not just use existing religious symbols, but create their own cults. In Mexico, after the death of one of the leaders of the La Familia drug cartel, Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, a new criminal organization, the Knights Templar cartel, emerged. Moreno wrote a pseudo-religious book and forced all cartel members to read it. And after his death, the new group decided to go even further. They modeled their organization on the medieval crusaders, those noble knights who once fought in the Holy Land to liberate Jerusalem. Cartel members declared that their aim was to ensure order, stop robberies, kidnappings, and extortions, and keep the state safe from rival organizations. At first glance, this sounded almost noble, like the mission of true knights. But, as is often the case with religious rhetoric in the hands of criminals, the noble words quickly turned into justification for the most brutal actions. The cartel began committing murders under the pretext that the victims were criminals and sinners who deserved to die. They sincerely believed in their code of honor and thought they were defending the poor and oppressed. But in practice, their activities brought only suffering and death. In faraway China, in temples where the scent of incense wafts and the quiet rustling of prayer flags can be heard, an ancient general named Guan Yu is honored. He lived in the 3rd century BC, served under Liu Bei, and became a symbol of loyalty and righteousness. Over time, the simple warlord has evolved into a deity, a god of war and wealth who is worshipped in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and Chinatowns around the world. He is often depicted in temples as a mighty warrior with a halberd, his face expressing the stern determination of a defender of justice. And here is an amazing paradox. The same deity is worshipped by both police officers and members of criminal triads. It would seem that how can lawmen and lawbreakers pray to the same God? But this is the profound wisdom of Chinese culture. Both value brotherhood, loyalty, and a code of honor, even if they understand these concepts in different ways. Religious fraternities can evolve in the most unexpected ways. In Nigeria, in the early 50s of the 20th century, the first student fraternity, called the Pirate Brotherhood, was founded. Initially, it was simply a club of young men who stood for equality and freedom and fought against the injustices of the colonial regime. Their meetings were held in the spirit of the noble ideals of enlightenment and social progress. But in the 60s and 70s, the movement began to take on an increasingly radical character. The brotherhoods introduced ritualistic clothing and elaborate initiation ceremonies that gave their activities a mystical flavor. Gradually, noble ideals took a back seat to practical considerations such as power, money, and control over territory. Modern Nigerian fraternities have evolved into paramilitary criminal cults that engage in drug and arms trafficking, illegal oil pumping, racketeering, armed robbery. They commit murder, engage in prostitution, political blackmail, human trafficking, and kidnapping. What began as a student movement for justice has become a serious threat to the security of the entire country. In Venezuela, where the air is filled with the scents of tropical flowers and the sounds of Latin American music, there is an amazing cult of Santos Malandros, sacred bandits. This belief originated from the ancient legend of Maria Leoncea, daughter of the god of nature, and took shape in the early 20th century with the growing popularity of spiritualism. Venezuelan folk religion is remarkably syncretic, intertwining spiritualism brought by European settlers, the Catholicism of the Spanish colonizers, African traditions preserved by the descendants of slaves, and the beliefs of local Indian tribes. From this complex fusion was born the notion that spirits dwell in celestial courts, one of which is the Court of Criminals, or Santos Malandros. This heavenly court is headed by the spirit of Ismael Sanchez, a petty criminal who was shot dead by the police in the 70s of the 20th century. Since his death, he has become an object of veneration among those who live on the fringes of society. Tobacco and alcohol are brought to the altars in his honor, and during the ceremonies, all those present, including children, smoke. Tobacco smoke is considered a way of communicating with the spirit world. The religion brought by slaves from the Congo to Cuba has also undergone a remarkable transformation in the New World. Palo Mayombe combined traditional Congolese beliefs with Catholicism and some Yoruba traditions. At the center of this religion is the Nganga, a ceremonial cauldron filled with earth, sticks, and the remains of animals, or even humans. Animals are sacrificed to feed the spirits and gain their patronage. Blood spilt for ritual purposes is considered a particularly powerful means of communicating with the other world. Unfortunately, this ancient religious tradition is often used by modern criminals to justify their actions. They invoke religious motives to commit the most common criminal acts. In the prisons of Rio de Janeiro, where the concrete walls are covered with graffiti and the air is heavy with stifling heat and human sweat, a surprising religious phenomenon has occurred. The armed gangs that effectively control these penitentiaries have fostered the development of Pentecostal churches among the prisoners. These prison churches have built their structure along the lines of regular Pentecostal congregations, but have adapted it to the specific conditions of prison life. Interestingly, Pentecostals in prisons live like ordinary gangsters, yet they enjoy the special respect of all prisoners. Their religiosity does not prevent them from participating in prison economics and politics, but it does give them a certain moral authority and protection. This is another example of how religious ideas adapt to the most unexpected social conditions. All these examples show us that the line between religion and crime is not always clear. People who commit acts that society considers criminal often genuinely believe that their actions have a higher religious meaning. They create elaborate systems of justification that allow them to maintain a positive self-image, even in the darkest of circumstances. When we speak of religious movements that really changed the course of history, our eyes inevitably turn to those moments when a unified faith split apart like an ancient vessel that could not withstand the internal strain. Imagine a quiet evening in the 7th century AD, somewhere in the Arabian desert. The stars are twinkling over the silent dunes, and in this cosmic silence, the fate of a religion that in a few centuries will be practiced by billions of people from the Atlantic Ocean to the islands of Indonesia is being decided. Islam, like all great religions, has not escaped internal divisions, although the Quran calls believers to unity and cohesion. But human nature is such that even the most sacred ideas become the subject of controversy and disagreement. Religion in such cases often turns into a kind of ferment that puts political strife into sacred forms and gives earthly conflicts a heavenly sound. The first decades of Islam were a time of remarkable unity. Under Prophet Muhammad, then under Caliphs Abu Bakr and Umar, the young community was united by the common goal of external expansion, and internal strife receded into the background. But after Umar's death, the disputes that would shape the future of the Islamic world for centuries to come began. At the center of all disagreements was the question of who should lead the Muslim community. This was not just an administrative issue. It was about the very essence of religious authority, about whether a person could be both a spiritual and a political leader, and if so, what qualities he should possess. The confrontation was between the Umayyad clans, who nominated Uthman, and the Hashemites, who supported Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law. Out of this conflict was born the first major schism in Islam, the Kharijite movement, which means those who have gone out. In the year 1657, 12,000 warriors left Ali's camp after he agreed to arbitrate with Muawiyah to settle a dispute over power. These men declared that only God has the right to judge, and refused to recognize any human decision in matters that they believed only Allah should decide. The Kharijites were the first Islamic purists who demanded strict adherence to the purity of Islam and its canons. They recognized the legitimacy of the first two caliphs, but opposed all others as violators of divine law. Their central idea was that the most honorable Muslim should be elected caliph by the free choice of the community, even if it was an Ethiopian slave. Origin did not matter, only piety and moral qualities. The Kharijites idealized the ascetic way of life, condemned wealth and luxury, forbade music, gambling, and alcohol consumption. They fought against those they considered traitors to Islam and against adulterers. Their movement spread throughout the Near and Middle East and North Africa, but over time it broke up into many small groups, Azrakis, Ibadis, and Sifrits, each of which had its own peculiarities in interpreting the sacred texts. But the most significant and long-lasting was the split between Sunnis and Shiites, a division that still defines the political map of the Islamic world. Shi'ism has become an influential minority that plays a key role in many countries. In Iran, it is the dominant ideology. Significant Shiite populations live in Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Dagestan, Turkmenistan, and Yemen. At first glance, the differences between Sunnis and Shiites may seem insignificant. Both recognize the 5 pillars of Islam: believe in the Day of Judgment, hell and paradise, revere prophets and angels, acknowledge the immortality of the soul and divine predestination, consider jihad a sacred duty, and the Quran a holy book. But these common features conceal fundamental differences that have shaped different types of religious consciousness. The main divergence concerns the status of the head of the Muslim state. Sunnis recognize the legitimacy of the caliph's authority and believe that the caliph is elected by the community and is responsible to it. Shiites argue that the spiritual and secular head of Muslims should be an imam from the direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, Ali, Hassan, Hussein. This imam, according to Shiite doctrine, has infallibility and divine knowledge, which is inaccessible to ordinary people. A particularly important place in Shiite theology is occupied by the doctrine of the hidden Imam Mahdi, the 12th Imam, who Shiites believe is not dead, but has hidden from the eyes of men, and will one day return as a Messiah to establish a reign of justice on earth. This belief in the coming of a Savior gives Shi'ism a special eschatological character and makes it particularly attractive to the oppressed and disadvantaged. Shi'ism has also spawned a cult of martyrdom that manifests itself in tragic festivals, especially on Muharram and the mourning day of Ashura, when believers commemorate the death of Imam Hussein at the Battle of Karbala. These ceremonies, known as shase wase, are emotionally striking. People beat themselves with chains, cut their foreheads with knives, and the streets of cities are stained with the blood of mourners. To an outsider, it may look frightening, but to the participants, it is a way of physically experiencing the suffering of their spiritual leaders, a way of touching the sacred through pain. Another important distinction concerns the concept of ijma, the general consensus of the Muslim community on issues that are not clearly explained in the Quran or Sunnah. Sunnis recognize ijma as a legitimate source of religious law, believing that the collective wisdom of believers can help resolve complex issues. Shiites reject this concept, arguing that only an infallible imam has the authority to make such decisions. The Shia tradition is also characterized by an extremely hostile and intolerant attitude towards followers of other faiths. Non-Muslims are considered ritually impure, and contact with them should be minimized. This creates a special atmosphere of religious isolation that can foster radicalized attitudes. In matters of marriage and family relations, the Shia also differ from the Sunnis in allowing temporary marriages, known as muta. This institution, which the Sunnis consider forbidden, allows marriages for a fixed period of time, which in some circumstances may be convenient from a practical point of view. Within Shi'ism itself, there are many currents. The Zaydis, called moderate Shiites, are in many ways close to the Sunnis. They favor the election of an imam from among the descendants of Ali, deny the divine origin of the imam's authority, and the doctrine of the hidden imam, and are tolerant of Sunnis. Zaydis make up the majority of the population in Yemen and have created a unique religious culture there. The Ismailis represent the other extreme of the Shia spectrum. This current emerged in the 8th century as a result of a dispute over who should become the 7th imam. Ismailis consider Ismail, or his son Muhammad, to be the last visible imam, after whom the true imams remain hidden from the eyes of the believers. Their teachings are remarkably complex and eclectic, intertwining elements of Sunni and Shia Islam, Kalam philosophy, Buddhist ideas, and Neoplatonic concepts. The Ismaili movement eventually divided into many subsects: Karmat, Fatimid, Druze, Nizarite, each of which developed its own special doctrines. In parallel with these political religious schisms, purely theological currents developed in Islam. The Mutazilites, who emerged in the middle of the 8th and early 9th centuries, created the first rationalist theological system in Islam. They tried to give the Quranic ideas a philosophical basis, striving to justify religion on a more rational basis, using the achievements of ancient logic and philosophy. The Mu'tazilites emphasized the importance of reason as a valuable element in the knowledge of divine truth. They opposed the crude anthropomorphism present in some Quranic descriptions of Allah, and argued that the Quran is a created work and not the uncreated Word of God. This allowed them to allow allegorical interpretations of the sacred text and to avoid a literal understanding of those passages that contradicted reason. Of particular importance was their doctrine of free will, in contrast to the strict predestination preached by Orthodox theologians. The Mu'tazilites maintained that man had real freedom of choice and was fully responsible for his actions. Without this freedom, they said, neither divine justice nor human morality is possible. The Mu'tazilite system of dogma, known as Kalam, even became the official state religion in the Caliphate under Caliph Ma'mun, who ruled from the 813th to the 833rd year. But this triumph of rationalist theology was short-lived. Later, the Mu'tazilite ideas were declared heresy, and their proponents were persecuted. In the modern world, we are witnessing the revival of many archaic ideas of past religious schisms, but in a reformed and modernized form. New Islamic movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Wahhabism, Salafism, Tablighat, Taliban, Al-Takfir wal-Hijra are based on the principles of Islamic fundamentalism and radicalism. They depart from the spirit of classical Islam with its traditional religious tolerance and embark on the path of terror and extremism. Wahhabism, a movement that has become an officially recognized confession in Saudi Arabia, is particularly significant in this regard. The movement emerged in the mid-18th century amid political disunity, social decay, and the spread of pagan cults in Central Arabia. Its founder, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, who lived from 1703 to 1787, was a follower of the strict ideas of the medieval theologians Ibn Hanbal and Ibn Taymiyyah. The central idea of Wahhabism is an unconditional return to the Quran and Sunnah, strict observance of the dogmatic precepts of pure original Islam, and strict monotheism, which they call Tawheed. Wahhabis categorically condemn any innovations in Islam: the cult of saints, pilgrimage to mausoleums, magic, witchcraft, amulets. They consider the Prophet Muhammad an ordinary human messenger who should not be deified or his tomb worshipped. The origins of the Wahhabi movement were very aggressive. Its followers looted the holy cities of Karbala and Mecca and mocked the tomb of the Prophet. Modern Wahhabism spreads globally through pilgrimages and a network of radical missionaries generously funded by rich oil-producing countries. This movement preaches submission to those in power, but in fact calls for jihad against all those who do not accept their teachings as infidels. But not all currents in Islam were inclined to such militancy. In the middle of the 8th and early 9th centuries, a remarkable mystical and ascetic movement known as Sufism emerged. The name itself comes from the Arabic word suf, which means wool, a coarse cloth from which the Sufis sewed their simple clothes, symbolizing their renunciation of worldly goods. Sufism is a unique socio-spiritual phenomenon, diverse and heterogeneous. It emerged as a result of the natural development of Islam, but was also influenced by Christian monastic traditions and other Eastern religions. In the early period, before the 10th century, Sufism was primarily asceticism, a pious way of life, abstinence, renunciation of worldly vanity, contempt for wealth, with strict adherence to the Quran and Sunnah. Later, after the 10th century, asceticism acquired a mystical form, the desire for personal communion with Allah through ecstasy or inner insight. The goal of Sufism is spiritual, intuitive knowledge of the deity, achieving a state in which the boundaries between man and God disappear. The great Imam Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali, who lived in the 10th to 11th centuries, was able to reconcile Sufism with Orthodox Islam by creating a moderate Sufism and integrating mystical love into jurisprudence. Sufism has a very developed cult of saints called Wali, friends of Allah. Pilgrimages are made to their tombs, which looks almost like pagan worship for strict Sunnis and Shiites. Sufism flourished in the 13th to 14th centuries, but then the tradition began a gradual decline. The history of the spread of Sufism in Dagestan is particularly interesting. The first stage covered the 11th to 14th centuries, when Arab missionaries brought Islam here, and their graves became holy places for the local population. The second stage occurred in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when the Highlanders' political protest against Tsarism took a religious form. The Caucasian Tariqat, also known as Muridism, was particularly militant, combining the knowledge of the path to God with the preaching of Ghazawat, the holy war against the infidels. Leaders like Muhammad Yaragski and the famous Imam Shamil used the ideas of Muridism to unite the mountain peoples against Russian conquest. Even today, Sufi brotherhoods such as the Qadiriyya, Naqshbandiyya, and Shaziliyya, with authoritative sheikhs and an extensive network of followers, remain in Dagestan. Religious cults and movements have always had a complex relationship with state power. In the ancient East, the practice of relations between religious cults and institutions of power was formed, which became a model for later civilizations to follow. These relations took different forms in different regions, but everywhere one could observe attempts to express the divinity of political power. In Mesopotamia, in the lands of ancient Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylonia, the king was neither a deity nor a high priest, but his authority was considered divinely sanctioned. The famous laws of Hammurabi emphasized the divine nature of authority and laws, and divine oaths and hordes, tests to reveal the will of the gods, were widely used in the judicial process. In ancient Iran, the cult of Mithras, the god of war and solar deity, became the basis of state power under the Achaemenid dynasty. Later, the religious reform of the prophet Zoroaster formed Mazdaism, which became the state religion. According to Zoroastrian doctrine, the state should be the earthly embodiment of the heavenly kingdom of light, and the monarch should be the servant of the supreme God, fighting evil and planting good. In ancient China, the emperor was deified as the Son of Heaven, personifying the cohesive unity of the country. Confucianism developed the patriarchal paternalistic concept of the state as a large family where everyone knows his or her place in the hierarchy of inequality. This doctrine was proclaimed the state doctrine in the Han Empire and defined the political culture of China for thousands of years. In the 20th century, the world witnessed the emergence of many new religious movements. In the West, they emerged in the 60s and 70s. In Russia, after the relaxation of state control since the mid-80s, the spread of new religions is explained by the fallacy of predictions about the extinction of religion and the surge of interest in religious quests, especially among young people. Disillusionment with the great ideologies after the Second World War, increasing alienation and self-alienation of the individual, spiritual insufficiency, pluralism of ideas, and globalization. All this contributed to the formation of new spiritual movements. In Russia, there was a particularly fashionable interest in religion. The terms karma, yoga, feng shui entered the mass circulation. There appeared syncretistic movements uniting different spheres: the Unification Church, the Church of Scientology, New Age practices. Even satanic groups emerged. In the late 90s, there were 4 such organizations in Tomsk alone. Diplomas were offered in parascientific areas: parapsychology, karma psychology. Many domestic movements copied the experience of Western new religious movements. Specifically, Russian were the Church of the Last Covenant, founded by Sergei Torop, who proclaimed himself a Vissarion, and the Ringing Cedars of Russia movement, founded by Vladimir Megre, and promoting harmony with nature in ancestral settlements. These movements reflected the peculiarities of the post-Soviet spiritual quest: the desire for simplicity, closeness to nature, and an alternative to urban civilization. Interestingly, most participants in new religious movements do not stay in them for long. Studies show that 70% leave the movements within a month. This suggests that for many people, exposure to new spiritual practices is only a temporary episode in their search for meaning in life. Various conspiracy theories are also widespread in the modern world, which can also be considered as a kind of cults. The New World Order theory claims that a secret totalitarian world government is being formed. Proponents of this idea believe in the existence of a shadow government formed by a secret ruling elite that seeks globalization to establish the power of a single authoritarian government. These theories include elements ranging from Christian eschatological prophecies to Masonic conspiracy ideas, from the fake protocols of the wise men of Zion to contemporary fears of total surveillance and population control. Such beliefs can become the basis for radical action and even terrorism, showing how ideas that begin as harmless theories can transform into dangerous cults. History teaches us that the line between spiritual quest and dangerous fanaticism is very thin. The human need for meaning, for belonging to something greater, for simple answers to complex questions. All these make us vulnerable to the influence of those who know how to exploit our fears and hopes. Yet we must not forget that many of those movements that were once considered dangerous cults have over time become a source of light and wisdom for millions of people. Perhaps the secret is to maintain the ability to think critically, not to lose touch with loved ones, and to remember that true spirituality always leads to love rather than hate, to understanding rather than fanaticism. That, my dear listeners, concludes our nightly journey through the winding paths of human beliefs. Thank you for spending these hours with me, reflecting on how religious ideas have shaped and continue to shape our world. May your dreams be restful, and your mornings bring clarity of thought and peace in your heart. See you in the next issue, when we will once again journey through the mysteries of the human soul. Good night.